Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the metal bridge of the ESV Defiance and looked out at the dark space ahead. 3 months had passed since the aliens first came to Earth. They called themselves the Galactic Council and said they wanted to be friends with humans. Jake had believed them at first. Most people on Earth had believed them too. Now he knew the truth and it made his blood run cold. The alien ship floated in the darkness like a dead whale. It was huge and covered with strange lights that blinked, in patterns Jake did not understand. His crew had found it drifting near the edge of the solar system. The aliens inside were all dead, but their computers still worked. What Jake found in those computers changed everything he thought he knew about the galaxy. Captain Lisa Hayes walked across the bridge carrying a small computer pad in her hands. She was the smartest person Jake knew, and she looked scared. That worried him more than anything else could. Lisa never got scared, and she never made mistakes when it came to reading alien information. "Sir, we have confirmed it," Lisa said in a quiet voice. "The Council has been killing off any race that gets too smart too fast. They have a name for it. They call it pruning the garden." Jake felt like someone had hit him in the stomach. The friendly aliens who had come to Earth with gifts and promises of peace were actually killers. They had been studying Earth and counting how many humans lived there. They wanted to know how strong Earth's weapons were and where the biggest cities could be found. All of it had been preparation for murder. Dr. Alex Turner had spent weeks looking at the alien technology they had captured. He was a thin man with thick glasses who never slept enough. Alex had found things in the alien computers that made him sick to his stomach. Now he stood beside Jake and Lisa with his face pale and his hands shaking. "Admiral, their technology is better than ours in some ways," Alex said. "But they have not made anything new in thousands of years. They just use the same old things over and over. They stay strong by making sure nobody else gets strong enough to fight them." Commander Ben Parker had been the one to lead the secret missions that found the truth. Ben was good at sneaking around and finding things that were supposed to stay hidden. He had taken small teams of soldiers to different parts of space where the Council had bases. What they found there would give Jake nightmares for the rest of his life. The Council had secret places all over the galaxy. In these places, they kept pieces of dead civilizations like trophies on a wall, bones and machines and books from races that no longer existed. All of these people had been killed for the same reason the Council wanted to kill humans. They had learned too much too fast. Ben showed Jake pictures from inside one of these places. Rows and rows of glass boxes filled with the remains of creatures that had once built cities and dreamed of reaching the stars. Some had been killed recently. Others had been dead for so long that only dust remained. The Council had been doing this for millions of years. "How much time do we have?" Jake asked. 2 years, maybe less, Lisa answered. "They are moving a big fleet toward our part of space. Once it gets here, they will destroy every human city and base. They will make sure nothing is left alive." Jake walked to the big window that looked out at space. Somewhere out there, the Council fleet was coming toward Earth like a storm made of metal and death. The aliens thought humans would just sit and wait to die like all the other races had done. They were wrong about that. He turned back to his crew and saw the same hard look in their eyes that he felt in his heart. These people had families back on Earth. They had children who played in parks and went to school and dreamed about growing up. The Council wanted to kill all of them just for being human. "Send a message to Earth Command," Jake said. "Tell them we know what is coming. Tell them we are not going to wait around for it to happen." Lisa nodded and started typing on her computer. Jake knew that once this message reached Earth, everything would change. The peaceful world that humans had built would become a war machine. Every factory would start making weapons. Every ship would become a warship. Every person would become a soldier. The aliens thought they knew what humans were like. They had watched Earth for months and seen people going to work and shopping for food and watching movies. They thought humans were soft and weak like most of the other races they had killed. They did not understand that humans had been fighting wars for thousands of years before they ever learned to fly between the stars. Dr. Turner pulled up more information on his computer screen. "Admiral, look at this," he said. "Their weapons are powerful, but they are simple. Their ships are fast, but they are not built for real fighting. I think they have forgotten how to fight a war because they have been winning too easily for too long." Jake studied the alien ship designs on the screen. They were beautiful in their own way with smooth curves and bright colors. They looked like art pieces more than war machines. Human ships were different. They were built to hurt and kill and keep fighting even when they were damaged. They made a mistake when they decided to kill us, Jake said. They should have done it fast while we still trusted them. Now we know what they are and we have time to get ready. We are going to show them what happens when you threaten humanity. The crew of the Defiance worked through the night sending messages and copying files. Soon every human base and ship would know the truth about the Council. The war that would decide the fate of humanity was about to begin, and Jake Morrison intended to make sure his species would be the one left standing when it ended. President Katie Sullivan stood in front of the biggest meeting room Earth had ever seen. Leaders from every country sat at the long tables looking at the evidence that Admiral Morrison had sent them. The pictures of dead alien races and the plans for human extinction lay spread across every surface. The room was quiet except for the sound of people breathing and turning pages. Katie had been president for only 2 years before the aliens came. She had spent most of her time dealing with normal problems like trade agreements and environmental protection. Now she had to figure out how to save the entire human race from being wiped out. The weight of it felt like it might crush her, but she knew she could not show weakness. The evidence is clear, Katie said to the room full of world leaders. The Galactic Council plans to kill every human being within 2 years. We can sit here and argue about politics, or we can work together to make sure our children have a future. What will it be? The response was faster than anyone expected. The president of Brazil stood up first. Brazil commits all of our resources to the defense of Earth. The Prime Minister of Japan nodded and said the same thing. Within an hour, every nation on the planet had agreed to put aside all other concerns and focus on one goal: humanity would survive. General Ryan Brooks took charge of turning the planet into a war machine. Ryan was a big man with gray hair who had spent 30 years learning how to fight wars. He had never imagined he would need to fight aliens, but the basic ideas were the same. You needed weapons and ships and soldiers, and you needed them as fast as possible. The moon became a giant construction site almost overnight. Ships that had been carrying supplies and passengers were converted into mobile factories. The space stations that had been used for research became weapons laboratories. Every piece of metal that could be found was turned into hull plating for new warships. Mars changed too. The red planet had been home to scientists and farmers who were trying to learn how to live in space. Now those same people were building the biggest ammunition factory in human history. The mines that had been digging for water started digging for metals instead. Every cave and tunnel became a storage place for missiles and bullets. Dr. Sophie Green led the team that was trying to understand alien technology. Sophie was young but brilliant, and she worked 20 hours a day without complaining. Her team took apart every piece of alien equipment they could find and figured out how it worked. Then they made human versions that worked better. The breakthrough came when Sophie realized that alien weapons were designed to be safe and precise. They had built-in limits to prevent accidents and reduce collateral damage. Human weapons had no such limits. When Sophie's team finished their work, human guns could punch through alien armor like paper, and human missiles could track targets that alien sensors could not even detect. Captain Nick Foster was chosen to command the first squadron of new human warships. The ships were called Reaper-class destroyers, and they looked like nothing that had ever flown in space before. Where alien ships were smooth and graceful, the Reapers were angular and threatening. They were painted black to make them harder to see against the darkness of space. Nick had been a fighter pilot before he became a ship captain. He understood that in a real fight, pretty did not matter. What mattered was being able to kill the enemy before they killed you. The Reapers were built for exactly that purpose. Every system on the ship was designed to find alien vessels and destroy them as quickly as possible. The training programs that Colonel Amy Roberts set up were harder than anything human soldiers had ever experienced. Amy knew that human troops would be facing aliens with better individual equipment and possibly better physical abilities. The only way to win would be through superior tactics and an absolute refusal to give up. Amy had studied every war that humans had ever fought. She took lessons from ancient battles with swords and spears and applied them to fighting with plasma cannons in zero gravity. She taught her soldiers that aliens might be stronger or faster, but they had never faced anything like human determination. The factories on Earth worked day and night. Cities that had made cars started making tanks. Companies that had built computers started building guidance systems for missiles. Farmers put down their plows and picked up welding torches. Everyone understood that this was not a normal war where life would go on as usual. This was a fight for the right to exist. Children went to school, but now they learned about engineering and weapon systems along with reading and math. Universities changed their programs to focus on military technology. Even artists and musicians found ways to contribute by creating propaganda that kept morale high and reminded everyone what they were fighting for. The asteroid belt became a mining operation unlike anything ever seen. Huge machines tore apart rocks that had been floating in space since the solar system formed. The metal and rare elements were turned into ship hulls and weapon components. Every asteroid that could be reached was strip-mined until nothing useful remained. Space itself became crowded with human activity. Cargo ships moved constantly between Earth, Mars, the Moon, and the asteroid belt carrying raw materials and finished products. Construction crews worked in the vacuum of space building new ships and weapons platforms. The solar system that had been quiet and peaceful just months before now buzzed with desperate activity. Katie Sullivan received reports every day about the progress of the military buildup. The numbers were staggering. In 6 months, humans had built more warships than had existed in all of previous human history. Weapons production was ahead of schedule. Training programs were turning out combat-ready soldiers faster than anyone had thought possible. But time was running out. Long-range sensors detected the Council fleet getting closer every day. Soon the aliens would arrive expecting to find a helpless world full of primitive creatures. Instead, they would find something that no species in galactic history had ever seen before. They would find humanity ready for war. The first fight came sooner than anyone expected. Captain Dan Hughes was patrolling the outer edge of the solar system in his ship, the ESV Vengeance, when his sensors detected something moving toward Earth. It was not supposed to be there, and it was not human. Dan knew immediately that the Council had sent scouts to check on their future victims. Dan was a quiet man who had spent 15 years commanding cargo ships before the war preparations began. He had never fired a weapon at another living being, but he had trained for this moment every day for 6 months. His crew of 32 people had trained just as hard. They knew that this first battle might decide whether humanity lived or died. The alien ship was beautiful in the way that all Council vessels were beautiful. It looked like a work of art floating through space with lights that pulsed in gentle patterns. The ship was 3 times bigger than the Vengeance, and its weapons were probably more advanced than anything humans had ever built. Under normal circumstances, Dan would have been completely outmatched, but these were not normal circumstances. The aliens thought they were approaching a primitive world that barely knew how to travel between planets. They expected to find crude rockets and maybe some basic laser weapons. They were not prepared for what humanity had become in the past 6 months. Commander Thex-9 led the Council patrol. He was a member of the Korthonai Empire, and he had been eliminating primitive species for over 200 years. To him, this was just another routine mission to gather information before the main fleet arrived to finish the job. He had no reason to expect any resistance from the creatures that lived on the 3rd planet. Thex-9 sent the standard message demanding that the human ships surrender and prepare to be boarded. This was how things always went. The primitive species would panic and give up without a fight. Then the Council forces would take what information they needed and leave. The actual killing would happen later when the big ships arrived. Dan Hughes received the surrender demand and smiled grimly. He sent back a message that Thex-9 would remember for the rest of his very short life. "This is Captain Dan Hughes of the Earth Space Navy. You have entered human territory with hostile intent. Leave now or be destroyed." The alien commander was so surprised by the response that he actually laughed. No primitive species had ever threatened the Council before. These humans were either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Either way, they would learn their place soon enough. The battle began when Thex-9 fired a warning shot across the bow of the human ship. It was meant to frighten the humans into immediate surrender. Instead, Dan Hughes responded by launching every weapon his ship carried directly at the alien vessel. The attack was so sudden and violent that the alien shields collapsed before they could adapt. Human weapons worked differently than anything the Council had ever seen. Instead of the elegant energy beams that civilized species used, Dan's ship fired solid metal projectiles accelerated to incredible speeds. The alien hull was designed to deflect particle beams and plasma bursts. It was not designed to stop chunks of dense metal traveling at significant fractions of light speed. The first volley punched through the alien ship's armor like bullets through paper. Atmosphere vented into space, carrying alien crew members with those emergency systems that had never been needed in 2 centuries of easy victories, suddenly activated throughout the ship. Science Officer Veltar watched in horror as his ship was torn apart by weapons he did not understand. The humans were supposed to be primitive. Their technology was supposed to be thousands of years behind Council standards. Yet somehow they had built guns that could destroy a patrol cruiser in minutes. Thex 9 tried to retreat, but human weapons had damaged his engines in the first attack. The Vengeance moved around the alien ship like a predator circling wounded prey. Dan Hughes had studied every naval battle in human history, and he knew that the key to victory was never giving your enemy time to recover or adapt. The second attack targeted the alien weapon systems. More solid projectiles tore through delicate energy conduits and precision-engineered weapon mounts. The beautiful Council ship was being turned into a cloud of debris and twisted metal. Nothing in Thex 9's training had prepared him for fighting an enemy that used such brutal and direct tactics. Within 20 minutes, 3 of the 4 alien ships were destroyed. Only Veltar's science vessel survived, and that was only because Dan Hughes deliberately let it escape. He wanted someone to carry news of what had happened back to the Council. He wanted them to know that humanity was ready to fight. Veltar's ship limped back toward Council space carrying the most terrifying news in galactic history. The humans had not just acquired space travel. They had weaponized it in ways that violated every civilized convention of warfare. Their ships fought like wild animals, attacking with no regard for honor or proper combat protocols. Admiral Claire Thompson received Dan's report 3 hours after the battle ended. Claire was in charge of analyzing alien technology and tactics for the Earth Defense Forces. What she learned from the wreckage of the Council ships confirmed humanity's greatest advantage and biggest weakness. The alien technology was indeed more advanced than human equipment in many ways. Their power systems were more efficient and their materials were stronger. But their weapons and defenses had not changed in thousands of years. They had become so used to winning easily that they had stopped innovating. Human technology was cruder, but it was also unpredictable. The aliens had never seen kinetic weapons used in space combat because civilized species considered them primitive and inaccurate. But humans had figured out how to make them accurate, and they did not care if other species thought they were primitive. The psychological impact of the victory was as important as the tactical lessons learned. For the first time in galactic history, a primitive species had not just survived first contact with the Council, but had actually won a battle against them. The news spread quickly through human space and morale soared. But Claire Thompson knew that the real test was still coming. The Council would not send another small patrol after this humiliation. They would send everything they had in the local sector to crush humanity before other species got ideas about resisting. The next battle would decide whether Dan Hughes had won humanity a fighting chance or simply made their eventual extinction more painful. Commander Troy Mitchell received new orders to prepare the main fleet for the Council's response. Troy had been put in charge of the largest military force humanity had ever assembled. Over 800 warships were hidden throughout the solar system, waiting for the aliens to come. When they arrived, they would find that humans had learned more than just how to build better weapons. They had learned how to use the galaxy's assumptions about primitive species as a weapon against their enemies. The space around Earth looked like something from a nightmare when the Council fleet finally arrived. What they saw was impossible according to everything they knew about primitive species. Instead of a few crude defensive ships, they found an armada that stretched from the Moon to Mars. Over 800 human warships hung in the darkness like sleeping predators waiting to strike. High Admiral Corex of the Hegemony led the Council, response fleet. He commanded 200 ships from 6 different alien races, and he had never lost a battle in 300 years of service. Corex expected this to be the easiest victory of his career. The primitive humans might have gotten lucky against a small patrol, but they could not hope to stand against the full might of civilized space. Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the ESV Wrath of Terra, looking out at the alien fleet through the viewport. His flagship was painted the same flat black as every other human warship. The color absorbed light and made the ships almost invisible against the background of space. Where council vessels gleamed with polished metal and decorative elements, the human fleet looked like holes torn in reality itself. Jake had been preparing for this moment for 8 months. Every human ship captain had studied the same tactical manuals and practiced the same attack formations. They had learned lessons from submarine warfare and fighter pilot training and ancient cavalry charges. The aliens expected a traditional space battle with neat formations and honorable single combat. They were going to get something very different. Captain Rob Hayes commanded the stealth division of the human fleet. His ships were equipped with technology adapted from the submarines that had once hunted enemy vessels in Earth's oceans. They could disappear from sensors and reappear anywhere within the battle zone without warning. No spacefaring civilization had ever developed tactics to counter this kind of warfare because no one had ever thought to use it. The battle began with the traditional council demand for surrender. Corex sent a message to Earth telling the humans to give up and accept their fate peacefully. He promised that their deaths would be quick and merciful if they did not resist. The response he received from Jake Morrison was not what he expected. "You came to our home to murder our children," Jake said over the communication channel. "We will show you what monsters really look like." Corex was shocked by the crude and emotional response. Civilized species accepted their extinction with dignity and grace. These humans seemed to think they could actually fight back against superior technology and numbers. The alien admiral decided to teach them a lesson they would not live long enough to forget. The council fleet moved into standard attack formation with the largest ships in front and smaller vessels providing support from the flanks. It was a formation that had won 1,000 battles against 100 different species. Every alien captain knew his role and executed it with precision developed over centuries of practice. The human response was chaos that somehow worked. Instead of forming neat battle lines, the black ships swarmed toward the alien fleet like angry insects. They moved in small groups that split apart and came back together in patterns that seemed random, but were actually carefully coordinated. The aliens had never seen anything like it. Lieutenant Colonel Eva Martinez commanded a squadron of fast attack ships that used the gravity of Earth's moon to achieve impossible speeds. Her ship swung around the lunar surface like stones in a slingshot and struck the Council command vessel at nearly 10% of light speed. The impact turned the massive alien dreadnought into an expanding cloud of superheated gas and twisted metal. The death of their flagship threw the alien formation into confusion. The Council had protocols for every situation they had ever encountered, but they had no plan for dealing with enemies who used gravity as a weapon. The human ships continued their swarming attacks, hitting weak points and disappearing before return fire could find them. Captain Steve Palmer led one of the stealth squadrons that appeared behind the alien fleet without warning. His ships had been hiding in the asteroid belt for 3 days, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. When they opened fire with their kinetic weapons, the alien rear guard was completely unprepared for attack from that direction. The aliens tried to adapt their tactics, but the humans were always one step ahead. Every time the Council ships formed a new defensive formation, the Black Fleet would change its attack pattern. The humans fought like they had been planning this battle for years, while the aliens struggled to understand what was happening to them. Dr. Rachel Cole watched the battle from Earth's command center and smiled grimly. Rachel had been put in charge of psychological warfare against the Council, and her plans were working perfectly. The aliens were not just losing ships and crew members. They were losing their confidence and their belief in their own superiority. The turning point came when Captain Nick Foster's destroyer squadron broke through the alien center and started attacking the Council ships from inside their own formation. The aliens found themselves shooting at human vessels while their own ships were in the background. Several council vessels were destroyed by friendly fire as their formation collapsed completely. Jake Morrison had studied every major naval battle in human history from ancient Greek triremes to World War II submarine warfare. He knew that the key to victory was not just superior weapons but superior tactics, and an absolute refusal to fight the enemy's kind of battle. The Council expected formal combat between opposing fleets. Instead, they got a street fight in 3 dimensions. The alien losses mounted quickly as human tactics proved impossible to counter. Council ships were designed for ceremonial displays of power and one-on-one duels with equally civilized opponents. They were not built to survive attacks from multiple directions by enemies who ignored every rule of proper warfare. Commander Ben Parker's intelligence division had identified the weak points in every major class of Council vessel. Human weapons, targeted engine cores and command centers instead of wasting time trying to overwhelm enemy shields. The alien ships died quickly and efficiently, while their crews were still trying to understand what kind of weapons were being used against them. By the time Corax realized how badly he had underestimated the humans, it was too late to retreat. The Black Fleet had surrounded his remaining ships and cut off every escape route. The High Admiral, who had never lost a battle in 300 years, watched helplessly as his armada was torn apart by an enemy he had thought was beneath notice. The battle ended when the last Council ship exploded in a flash of white light that could be seen from Earth. Of the 200 alien vessels that had come to destroy humanity, only a handful of escape pods remained. Jake Morrison allowed them to survive for the same reason Dan Hughes had let one ship escape from the first battle. Someone needed to carry the news back to Council space. The survivors who made it back to their home worlds brought reports that no one wanted to believe. The primitive humans had not just defeated a Council fleet, but had done it with tactics and weapons that violated every assumption about how space warfare worked. The age of easy victories was over, and the galaxy would never be the same. High Counselor Zethrin had ruled the Galactic Council for over 400 years, and he had never been afraid of anything until now. The reports coming in from across the galaxy told a story that should have been impossible. The primitive humans, from the third planet of an unremarkable star, had not only survived the Council's attack but had completely destroyed it. The emergency session of the Council was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. Representatives from dozens of species sat in the Great Chamber arguing and panicking in equal measure. Some demanded immediate retaliation with even larger fleets. Others suggested negotiating with the humans before they decided to expand beyond their home system. The problem was that the humans had not stopped with their victory at Earth. Black-painted ships had been spotted throughout Council space, attacking military installations with surgical precision. They moved through the galaxy like ghosts appearing from nowhere and disappearing before any response could be organized. No Council world was safe anymore. Captain Steve Palmer had volunteered to lead the raids deep into alien territory. Steve understood that winning one battle was not enough. The Council needed to learn that humanity could strike anywhere at any time. His small fleet of stealth ships had spent 3 months proving that the galaxy's former masters were now helpless prey. The attacks were carefully planned to cause maximum psychological damage. Human ships did not try to conquer planets or destroy cities. Instead, they targeted the symbols of Council power. Military bases were reduced to rubble. Government buildings were blown apart. The message was clear, even though no demands were ever made. Dr. Rachel Cole had designed the psychological warfare campaign that was tearing the Council apart from the inside. Rachel knew that the aliens' greatest weakness was their assumption of superiority over all other species. By proving that assumption wrong, humanity had broken something fundamental in the alien mindset. The Council races had spent millions of years believing they were the natural rulers of the galaxy. They had eliminated any species that might challenge that belief and grown comfortable in their dominance. Now a primitive species from nowhere had shattered their worldview, and they did not know how to respond. President Katie Sullivan received the first alien delegation 3 weeks after the battle at Earth. The ambassador was a tall creature with gray skin and large eyes, who introduced himself as Speaker Volmek of the Traitor Coalition. He came not as a conqueror, but as a supplicant begging for a non-aggression treaty with humanity. Katie met with Volmec in the same room where she had once planned Earth's defense against Council extinction fleets. Now, alien ambassadors sat across, from her offering tribute and promising eternal friendship. The transformation was so complete that Katie sometimes wondered if she was dreaming. More delegations followed as word spread that the humans were willing to talk instead of simply attacking. Representatives from a dozen council species came to Earth with gifts and promises of cooperation. They all wanted the same thing: assurance that the black ships would not appear in their home systems. The psychological impact of human victory had spread far beyond the species that had actually fought at Earth. News traveled fast through galactic communication networks, and every race heard the same impossible story. The Council's enforcement fleets had been destroyed by primitives using weapons and tactics that no civilized species would ever consider. Captain Rob Hayes led a special mission to the Council's primary intelligence center on the planet Kethmara. Rob's stealth ships bypassed every defense system and landed troops directly inside the most secure facility in Council space. The human soldiers spent 6 hours copying files that contained the complete history of Council genocides. The information that Rob's team recovered was released simultaneously to every species in the galaxy. For the first time, primitive races learned the truth about what happened to species that developed too quickly. The Council's secret genocide program was exposed for all to see, and the political consequences were immediate. Rebellions broke out. On 100 worlds, a species that had been kept in ignorance learned about the Council's true nature. Some revolts were put down quickly, but others grew into full-scale wars of independence. The galaxy was fragmenting as the Council's control collapsed under the weight of its own exposed crimes. Admiral Jake Morrison received reports of the chaos spreading through Council space and decided it was time to end the war permanently. Jake knew that scattered rebellions might eventually be crushed if the Council had time to adapt to the new situation. What was needed was a final demonstration that would make any thoughts of revenge impossible. The Council's home system was protected by the largest fleet in galactic history. Over 3,000 ships from every member species formed defensive rings around the central world where the High Council met. The aliens were certain that even the terrifying humans could not overcome such overwhelming numbers. Jake Morrison's response was to bring the entire human space navy to the Council home system. 800 black ships appeared at the edge of the system and began moving toward the planet at the center. The final battle between humanity and the Council was about to begin. But there was no battle. As the human fleet approached the massive alien defenses, something unprecedented happened. Ship after ship in the Council fleet powered down their weapons and sent surrender signals. Entire squadrons that had never lost a fight simply gave up without firing a shot. The psychological warfare had worked better than anyone had dared hope. The Council fleets had heard the stories of what happened to ships that fought the humans. They had seen the wreckage of vessels that had tried to stand against the Black Armada. Many of them decided they would rather surrender than face the same fate. High Councilor Zethran found himself alone in the Great Chamber, where the Council had once planned the extinction of dozens of species. His allies had fled or switched sides or simply hidden in their home systems, hoping the humans would forget about them. The galaxy's former master was now just an old alien waiting to learn his fate. Admiral Morrison's shuttle landed in the Council Chamber Plaza surrounded by guards and reporters from across the galaxy. Jake walked into the building where so many genocide orders had been signed and looked around at the empty seats where alien rulers had once decided which species lived and which died. When Jake finally spoke, his words were broadcast to every inhabited world in the galaxy. His message was simple and terrifying in its certainty. You sought to make us extinct because we progressed too quickly. You failed to understand that progress is what we do. We are the species that looked at the impossible and made it inevitable. Jake continued speaking while Zethran and the few remaining council members listened in silence. You wanted to prune the garden. Instead, you taught the roses to grow thorns. The age of council rule is over. The galaxy will learn to govern itself, or it will answer to humanity. The years that followed brought peace to the galaxy for the first time in millions of years. The Council's genocide program ended, and species were allowed to develop naturally without fear of extinction. Trade flourished between worlds that had been enemies for centuries. But everyone remembered the black ships that had made it possible. When human vessels appeared in a star system now, they were greeted with respect and sometimes fear. The galaxy had learned that humanity could be a generous friend or a terrible enemy, depending on how they were treated. The most frightening thing for the former council races was not the presence of human ships, but their absence. When the black fleet disappeared from a system, it meant that humanity had decided that particular threat was no longer worth their attention. In a galaxy now ruled by human standards, that was the most terrifying judgment of all.